In the first part of our conversation with Labour Minister Errol McLeod, he told Andy Johnson about the process leading up to the rollout of the government's legislative reform agenda relating to the country's suite of labour legislation and about the situation regarding the settlement of 66 of the 75 pieces of unfinished business the government met after it took office in 2010 relating to collective agreements. In part 2 of that discussion, the minister again elaborates on some of these issues and talks about his continuing work in seeking to transform the small and micro enterprise sector in the country.
All right, so you were responding to my question and you were saying it was not difficult, as I may have imagined, Minister, that you would have had to demonstrate that you were in fact not a trade union leader in the office of the Minister of Labour. And I had said that by the time you would step down as President General of the OWTU, the sentiments from particularly people in the private sector were that you had matured. And I said that I put my own interpretation of what they meant by that. You had become much more acceptable to some of them than probably when you started 25 years before that.
Yeah. Well, I think I indicated to a number of them that I wasn't going to be at all prepared to abandon some very important principles which I had always held. But I am going to be as pragmatic as is necessary to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago benefits from what I do. And that I had to recognize and respect the different interests coming to my door as Minister of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. I'm enjoying this, Andy. And I appreciate the atmosphere and so on. But I thought that I might just go back a little bit.
Certainly.
To the labor reform agenda.
Yes.
I jumped it just now. In addition to the Industrial Relations Act, which is a big item, indeed that is the biggest item, there are other aspects of labor law which are also being considered, and to which we are committed to making important changes. For instance, the Workmen's Compensation Act, Chapter 8805. The Workmen's Compensation Act is an very old piece of legislation. If I remember my history well, I think it goes back to something like 1928. I am not too sure. It might have been amended in 1966. And I recall a particular attorney at law, a judge. He was a puny judge years ago. He left and went someplace. We had one of our education sessions at the OWTU. I was quite an apprentice at that time in the whole business. And the Workmen's Compensation Ordinance was being argued about. And it presented a scenario in which they considered you to be entitled to workmen's compensation for work-related injuries and so on if you were deemed a laborer and if you were in receipt of a wage of less than $5,000 annually. That is where we are still, at this time. But you might raise the point and argue, well, how have workers taken this? How have the employers responded to this? And a greedy employer might take the position that you are in receipt of so many times more than $5,000 a year, in which case you are not entitled to workmen's compensation. No, they're smarter than that. They applied the calculation of the benefit, yes, and they would have allowed sleeping dogs to lie. Because if they had refused at all to compensate somebody who legitimately had a claim, yes, then it would have awakened all other such persons. And you might have had a mini revolution on your hands. So they allowed sleeping dogs to lie. Now, we have been looking at the Workmen's Compensation Ordinance with the view to bringing it to modern times and modern levels, and in accordance, certainly, with the minimum standards that are enunciated by the International Labour Organization. And the present status on the Workmen's Compensation Act is that it is being drafted, a bill is being drafted at the Office of the Attorney General at this time. And only about a week or two ago, I appeared before the Legislative Review Committee, and I inquired into how far we had reached on this, and I was promised that it is being very actively worked upon, and in short measure, we should be presenting to the LRC and taking it forward. I have talked about the Industrial Relations Act, but I want to make specific mention of what we want to do insofar as the independence of the Industrial Court is concerned. Now, the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to thank all those who had served in the past. I want to thank very sincerely those who are serving now. Quite often, we do not recognize the contributions that are being made by persons in those offices of judges of the Industrial Court, the contributions they are making to stability in Trinidad and Tobago. The Industrial Court is deemed a superior court of records. It is, in other words, in line with the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago. And apart from the president of the Industrial Court, and perhaps the vice president, I'm not too sure on this one, I will research it properly, everybody else is considered at levels that are below that which applies to the High Court. We have to deal with the Industrial Court in a manner that will indicate to the rest of the national community that we are serious about people being decently treated and considered in the application of their tasks. The judges in the Industrial Court are without tenure.
They work on contract.
And that is being looked after. And I wish to commit again this government to doing something about that. And because of their working on contract, one may always ask a question about their independence. So we want to deal with that question of independence. We want to ensure the security of tenure of judges and, the whole process for the appointment of judges and so on is a matter that is being very actively worked on.
It's pretty much a principal position because there is no evidence or nothing to suggest that the way in which the court pronounces upon matters suggests that is a hostage. Those judgments are hostage of their situations. So, right? It's proven to be a very independent institution in spite of the the manner of engagement of the judges, right?
And that is why I would compliment very wholeheartedly the members of the Industrial Court. I mean, to have been as independent as they have demonstrated, under conditions that we are talking about, I mean, really is something that is very, very, very commendable. We just want to ensure, yes, that the situation is brought more watertight.
Yeah, I just going off agenda for a bit, but as you raise it, it is something that I've thought about a lot of times in my reporting, how in fact, people can, and we have demonstrated that in Trinidad and Tobago, how we can rise to an occasion and we can come to positions where it fits with what we are required to do, because as you say, outside of the president and vice president, a lot of the membership of the court comes from either people who are industrial relations practitioners, former trade union leaders, and so on. But when they sit on a case, they don't sit in those capacities, and the judgments don't reflect their biases or their prior biases.
Very well. And that is why I love them. Yeah. There are people who we ought to be very proud about. And, well, they say you don't say very much about judges.
All right, I want to move a little bit to the other part of your portfolio, small and micro enterprise development. Let me ask you to begin by describing what that is. What is a small and micro enterprise, small or micro enterprise? Mm-hmm. And then we go into some of the things you've done to address that issue.
I am told that enterprises that are with minimal capital, enterprises that employ less than 25 people, I think so, are deemed to be small. And you have the micro ones, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and so on. The promotion of small and micro enterprises is becoming more and more necessary, given the way in which small island economies, and I mean, we sometimes think and behave as though we big in the world, and it is only on the basis of the oil and gas that we still have. And one needs to emphasize that oil and gas are wasting assets, and one day we will be without oil and gas. And I was saying to an audience yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, I was appointing the NEDCO board. And I was saying that we will come to the stark reality of our smallness when we wake up one morning and there is no more oil and gas. And we then begin to appreciate more deeply that there is hardly any difference between Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada, hardly any difference between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, or any other of the small island states that are members of CARICOM, and even those that are Spanish-speaking, and those that are French-speaking, and so on, like Guadeloupe and Martinique, and so on. It is oil and gas that keeps us buoyant, and that we need to be looking in other areas. I spoke with TUCO yesterday. I presented, I didn't present anything to them. I went to witness the signing of a memorandum between NEDCO and TUCO, so that opportunities are being made available for the Calypsonian to recognize his craft and to have a stream through which he can develop that craft to ensure an equitable means of livelihood, and perhaps to provide an opportunity for somebody who will keep his records and somebody who will handle his management, and so on and so on and so on. The whole thing is to develop a sense of entrepreneurship so that people are going to see the fundamental essence in being able to fish so that they can feed themselves for a lifetime rather than depend on somebody giving them a fish every day so that they are fed today and they then fold their arms and wait until tomorrow. I think to too great an extent we are creating a little bit more and more a dependent society. Yes?
It's glad that it's good that you gave that explanation of it, because I saw a picture in the paper today just before we started talking with you greeting the president of TUCO, Lutalo Masimba, and the caption talked about some event at NEDCO and a relationship between TUCO and NEDCO, and I wondered, well, what kind of relationship that was being envisaged?
Yes.
So you just explained some of what it involves.
Yes. I mean, there had always been small business development in Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah, some people funded it on the basis of susu. Others promoted it on the basis of family resources coming closer together. Some of them funded it on the basis of friendly societies and so on. Again, I was speaking at a friendly society gathering, and there were very few people. And I recalled, and some people were astounded by my suggesting that I went to the lodge, the community lodge, with my mother's friendly society card, to pay her dues. And I remember the days of the ration card. So people started to look at me, and they look at the color of my hair and say, okay, perhaps he was around at that time. You know, and I said that there were friendly societies then because our communities were friendlier than they are now. And we have to get back to the foundation of such institutions if we want to rescue this place. And then there wasn't much emphasis on oil and gas. There is that emphasis now, and perhaps we will wake up one day and find that we are without oil and gas and feel like the person who realizes that all of his clothes were stolen while he was asleep.
Because I think it may very well be correct to say that the majority of people who work in Trinidad and Tobago, as is the case in some mature economies, I think I saw a statistic some years ago saying that in the United States, the vast majority of workers work for small businesses, and the majority of businesses are small business operations.
And in Trinidad and Tobago, some 80% of all employment is with small businesses. So the administration in office in 2002, I think it was, recognized, it seems, the importance of our going forward with the development of an entrepreneurial cadre of people and so on, and established the National Entrepreneurial Development Company, NEDCO. 8 years ago, 2002, well, when we came into office in 2010, before that, NEDCO had been established. And we obviously would examine what NEDCO was doing. We looked at what its mission ought to have been, what its mission was, and we found that NEDCO was not being operated along lines that aligned it to its mission at all. It was evident that within the first 8 years of NEDCO's operation, it was deviating from its mandate, and it had become more of an agency for political patronage than an agency to promote business. I mean, there are so many stories, some of which are documented, And I don't want to get into pointing fingers and name calling and so on. I mean, already we have too much of that going on almost every night. When NEDCO was established, we are told that there was a loan ceiling of $30,000. But one of the first persons to become a beneficiary of NEDCO's assistance went to NEDCO's office with a political operative at the time and got a loan of $250,000, a loan that was not being serviced up to 2010, and we had to take particular action, right? And that's not the only one, but we thought that, well, I think that I shouldn't delve too much on that. Since 2010, that certainly has no longer been the practice, and I called upon those persons whom I appointed 2 days ago that practice will not return at all so long as I am there and I have anything to do with it. NEDCO falls under my portfolio.
Yeah. There was an event in Pinal some months ago, a NEDCO event at which some people were called up and identified and were recognized for their own initiatives, their own entrepreneurial initiatives. What is it? They had come up with ideas that NEDCO was then going to take and see to what extent they can be made viable businesses, viable operations. And that is a part of how you all are moving, or certainly under your stewardship,
Yes.
to make it
Yes.
more tethered to its mandate.
Yeah, a number of people were identified, and they came with their business ideas, and NEDCO would have assisted them with the development of their ideas. NEDCO would have done some mentoring. NEDCO would have extended services and seed capital and so on. I must tell you that we have since raised the loan ceiling to $100,000, yes? And if one had been a good creditor or debtor, one can have up to, I think, $250,000 if you are going to expand the business and so on. You seem to be doing well. And if these persons doing these businesses and so on, if they prove to be doing well, keeping good accounts, subscribing to good order and so on, right? Insofar as business development is concerned, such persons can qualify for the Fair Share program, in which case they can access contracts with government or government agencies, contracts that are worth up to $1 million.
And that was the name of the program, the Fair Share program.
The Fair Share program.
The person who is providing the assistance is the creditor, and the person who is the recipient is the debtor in that case.
And to date, over 100 persons have received entrepreneurial training, and 60 of them will receive incubator services. You know, you're going to set up this thing, and the incubator services will comprise mentoring, coaching, physical space for the businesses, and they will have seed capital and equipment financing of up to $100,000. Tremendous work is being done. 2 incubators are already in operation. You identify the one in Pinal, and there is one in Sangre Grande.